What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, yesterday and the day before, we talked about the defensive side of the ball and whether the secondary was good enough for the Detroit Lions to be a good team in the 2020 season. We talked about whether the pass rush was good enough for the Detroit Lions to be, to be successful in the 2020 season. But then we turn over to the offensive side of the ball, and this position group, they're in the receiving corps, we know is good enough for them to have success. They were arguably the most efficient and the most effective position group on the team last season, and they honestly carried the Detroit Lions to the little success that they did have last year. Now, we obviously know that they are good enough to have success with, we obviously know that this receiving corps is good enough for the Detroit Lions to have success, but some people are even asking and posing the question, did the Detroit Lions have the best wide receiver corps in the entirety of the NFL? With the talent at the top end and the talent all the way through and all the depth that we have in our receiving corps, do the Detroit Lions actually have the best receiving corps in the NFL? That is what we're going to be talking about today. We're just going to be going over every single player in this receiving corps pretty much, and, looking at what they do as individuals, how they work as a team, and just, comparing it to other people in the NFL and seeing, do they have, or could you make a case that the Detroit Lions have the best wide receiving corps in the NFL? Now, before we do get into talking about that, if you are new to the channel and are enjoying the content, consider liking the videos and subscribing to the channel. It takes 2 seconds out of your day to make mine, and I'd be very, very appreciative to everybody that chooses to do so. But with that being said, let's get into looking at this receiving corps, taking a deep dive and deciding whether or not they actually have the best receiving corps in the NFL. Now, the Detroit Lions last year had a top 10 passing offense with over 3,900 yards, 28 touchdowns, and only 15 interceptions, and they did that while having a backup slash third string quarterback for over half the season. So we know the quarterback play wasn't the reason that this offense had a top 10 passing offense. It was the receiving corps. The receiving corps, carried this team. As I said in the beginning, they really contributed to all of the success that the Detroit Lions had, even though we didn't have a lot of it. All of the success that we did have last year came from the receiving corps pretty much. Now, getting into our number one wide receiver and arguably a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, we got Kenny Golladay. Last season, Kenny Golladay had 1,190 receiving yards, which was 7th in the NFL, only behind 5 wide receivers and Travis Kelce, the tight end. He had 11 touchdowns, which was the most in the NFL last season, so he was first in touchdowns, and he did that while only having 116 targets on the season, which ranked 25th out of all receivers in 2019. So Kenny Golladay did pretty much more with less. He got more stats, he got more yards and more touchdowns than any other wide receiver, and he did that while being the 25th most targeted wide receiver. 25 wide receivers had more targets than him, and he put up more stats than pretty much all of them. Now, Kenny Golladay is coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons and was a first-time Pro Bowler last season. Now, Kenny Golladay doesn't necessarily get the respect that he deserves because the Detroit Lions, aren't winning football games. They aren't on, they're not in the national spotlight all the time. But Kenny Golladay is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, and I firmly believe that. I will argue with anybody that Kenny Golladay is a top 5 wide receiver. He deserves more respect than he's getting. And if you just look at the stats that he put up with backup quarterbacks for half the season, it just goes to show he is a top 5 wide receiver. And, if you have a top 5 wide receiver, if you're making the case that your wide receiving core is the best in the NFL, having a top 5 wide receiver is not going to hurt your argument. Now, moving on to Marvin Jones, our wide receiver 2. Now, last season, Marvin Jones had an okay year. He had 779 receiving yards, which ranked 44th in the NFL. He had 9 receiving touchdowns, which was tied for 4th in the NFL, and he did that while having only 91 targets, which was 50th in the NFL, and was actually 3rd on the Detroit Lions. Now, obviously, those stats were from 2019, where he only played in 13 games. Now, Marvin Jones might be the best number 2 wide receiver in the NFL. Maybe second place, you probably give that to Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, whoever you think is the number 2 receiver there. But outside Tampa Bay, he might be the second best wide receiver 2 in the NFL. He puts up, he's consistently, when he's healthy, pushing for that 1,000-yard season and 10 touchdown season. This season, if he were to stay healthy for all the games and Matthew Stafford were to stay healthy, it's very realistic that he could have broken 1,000 yards and he could have tied, if not surpassed, Kenny Golladay in those 11 touchdowns last season. He is a severely underrated wide receiver as well. I wouldn't say that he's a top 5 wide receiver like Kenny Golladay, but, I would definitely put Marvin Jones in that top 20, top 25 range. I think he is much, much better than a lot of other wide receivers. I think he could be the starting wide receiver on a lot of NFL teams. It just so happens that we have a stud in Kenny Golladay in front of him, so he is the number 2. But that also helps him out because then he's not getting the number 1 cornerback. He's not getting, coverages aren't being schemed around him, so he's open and makes some of the most He makes some of the best contested catches I've ever seen. He is a fantastic wide receiver. He probably is the second best wide receiver in the NFL right now. And once again, if you're arguing that the Detroit Lions have the best wide receiver core in the NFL, saying that you have one of the best wide receiver 2s and one of the best wide receiver 1s is all, good for your argument. Then we move on to Danny Amendola, the slot receiver. Now, Danny Amendola last season had 678 receiving yards, which was 54th in the NFL. He had 1 touchdown, which was, not very good, tied for 164th in the NFL. And he did that on 97 targets, which was 43rd in the NFL. Now, he had one of his most efficient seasons with the Detroit Lions last year. I believe he was second in receiving yards in his career. He had the second most receiving yards in his career last year with the Detroit Lions, and I believe had one of the best yards per reception in his career last season. So he's a very efficient, very, very solid slot wide receiver. He was kind of the security blanket on third downs for Matthew Stafford or whoever the quarterback was. They looked to Amendola on third down more often than not, and more often than not, it ended up working out. Now, I'm not going to come up here and tell you Danny Amendola is a top 30 wide receiver. I'm not going to tell you that, but I would definitely say that he is a top 50 wide receiver, which is better than a lot of, top 50 wide receiver. That's, wide receiver 2 category for a lot of teams. I would say that he is top 50. I would definitely, make that argument. And, top 50, if we have 3 wide receivers in the top 50, that is a very, very solid top 3. But behind that, we even have more depth and more talent. Moving on to Marvin Hall, deep ball Hall, big play Hall is what his Twitter handle is, whatever you want to call him. Last year, all he did was make big plays. All he did was catch deep balls. Now, last year, Marvin Hall had 216 receiving yards and 1 touchdown last season. He did that with only 11 targets while averaging 37.3 yards per reception, which was by far the most in the NFL. Let me repeat that. He had 37 yards a reception. So every time he caught the ball, it was going to be 37 yards. Or every time he caught the ball, it was averaging out to be 37 yards. That sounds a lot, but he had a lot of games where his receptions went for 50 or 60 yards. He had a couple where it went for 20, which is what brings the average down. But against the Green Bay Packers, I think he had 1 catch for 57 yards. Against the Minnesota Vikings, he had 1 catch for 50 yards. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had 2 really big receptions for over 30 plus yards. Every time this guy got targeted, every time he caught the ball, it was going to be 30, 40, 50, even 60 yards downfield. And it was going to be a big play, if not a touchdown play for the Detroit Lions. And that adds value. We just talked about our top 3 wide receivers. They're all top 50 in the NFL, which is really, really good. But then we have the player in the NFL that averages 37 yards a reception. This guy, we don't even need to target him a lot. If we target him once per game and he gets that catch, if we target him, if he gets 1 reception a game and gets to that 37-yard average mark, that is a lot of yards and a lot of big plays for the Detroit Lions in this 2020 season. And he's not going to be the number 3 wide receiver. He's not going to step up and be a full-time wide receiver where he's going to get 60, 70 to 100, targets and 60 to 70 receptions a season. But he's going to be a guy that the Detroit Lions target a couple times a game, and once or twice a game, he's going to make a big play, and that has value to a team. He's the guy on the offense that can take the top off of a defense. He can stretch the field, and that adds a lot of value to the team. Even if he's not getting those receptions, that just the ability to stretch the field and get those big plays on occasion adds a lot to the Detroit Lions team. And it's not like last season was a fluke, as when he was with the Atlanta Falcons in his first season, he averaged 30 yards of reception. So we know that is his mantra. We know that is what he does well, and there's no reason to believe that he will not do the same thing in the 2020 season. And then we have Quintez Cephus, who I believe will be the 5th wide receiver on this roster. Now, Quintez Cephus last year in Wisconsin had 901 yards, 7 touchdowns, and he did that while only receiving 59, or he did that while only having 59 receptions. Now, he did this, that seems like a very solid season, but Wisconsin is a run-first team. They have Jonathan Taylor, who had over 2,000 yards this season. They are a run-first and run-often team. They do not pass the ball a whole lot unless they are trailing, and Wisconsin was a very, very good team this year, as I believe they ended the college football season ranked 8th in the country. So they were a very good team. They did not lose a lot of football games, so they were not behind a lot. But Quintez Cephus still found a way to get almost 60 receptions, over 900 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which is very, very good. He's great run after the catch. He's a great wide receiver, has great mindset, runs really good routes, has really good hands and makes pretty good contested catches. And just, he is a very good wide receiver, and I think he will transition to the NFL very well. And he will contribute to this Detroit Lions team. It may not be a lot in his rookie season, but he is going to contribute late in games. When Danny Amendola gets tired, when Marvin Jones gets tired, or if he gets injured or something, we can have Quintez Cephus step in and be a super, reliable target for Matthew Stafford. And being on a rookie contract, being a fifth round pick, having a small contract, being on his rookie contract, having that fifth wide receiver there that runs good routes, has good hands, is super, super physical after the catch. That is a fantastic wide receiver 5. And, I'm not taking too many other wide receivers at the 5th receiver spot. So, if you go to any roster, if you pick out a wide receiver 5, I'm taking Quintez Cephus over most of those guys. Now, that is great, the receiving core, but then you move over to the tight ends, and it just gets even more scary. Now, we have TJ Hockenson, obviously, as we drafted him with the 8th overall pick in the 2019 NFL draft, and TJ Hockenson last year had 367 yards, 2 touchdowns on 59 targets. So, solid season. I wouldn't say that's great. I wouldn't say that is like a top tight end pick, and I wouldn't say that is worth the number 8 pick in the NFL draft, but he did get injured, as I believe he only played in 12 NFL games last season. Even though his stat line for the season doesn't look great, we saw the flashes last year. In week 1, his first NFL game, he set the rookie record. I believe it was either the rookie record or the all-time record for receiving yards in a game by a tight end, when he had 131 receiving yards, 1 touchdown on only 6 receptions. So this dude balled out in week 1, and the NFL figured out pretty quickly that if you leave TJ Hockenson open, if you give him an opportunity, this man can be a problem. And we saw those flashes last year. Even after week 1, we saw the flashes of him being a dominant tight end, but it just wasn't consistent. And you could expect that out of a rookie, Even though he was the 8th overall pick in the NFL draft, he is a rookie. He's going to make rookie mistakes. And this season, we've seen all the videos. We've seen all of his hype videos, all of the videos of him lifting, all the videos of him working out with George Kittle and the people at Iowa with the, jugs machine. We've seen all of these videos of him working out, him looking bigger, him looking stronger, looking faster, catching footballs. We've seen the videos of him running routes. And he looks bigger, he looks faster, he looks stronger. In his second season, he's going to be more adept to the NFL. He's going to be more NFL ready, obviously, because he's had a season to prepare. He's had a season in the NFL to kind of acclimate to the NFL, and he's going to be so much better next year. Tight ends, generally, they break out in year 2. I don't know why. It's just kind of the historical thing that happens. And TJ Hockenson is going to break out. He's going to have a huge season next year because he's more adept to the NFL. He's adapted to it. He's bigger and stronger as he's worked out with NFL All-Pros and Hall of Famers. I believe he worked out with Tony Gonzalez too. He's been working this offseason. He's been working his butt off. And he is going to be a great tight end next season. And why he's a great blocker? He showed last season that he has the flashes at wide receiving too. As I said, week 1, he had over 130 receiving yards and 1 touchdown in his first NFL game. So we know he can do it. We know he can put the pieces together and be a dominant tight end and take over football games. We just got to see it more consistently. And in his second season, he's not going to make those rookie mistakes, and he is going to be more consistent as a tight end in the 2020 season. Then we move on to our tight end 2 in Jesse James, who, last year we paid a lot of money to come in free agency, and he didn't really do a whole lot, or at least Detroit Lions fans don't think he did a whole lot. But looking at Jesse James last year, he had 16 receptions for 142 yards while averaging 8.9 yards a reception in 2019. Now that 8.9 yards a reception was the second highest in his career. Yeah, in the Detroit Lions system last year, he had the second most receiving yards per reception in his career. So, when he got the ball, he was making plays. He was pretty efficient, averaging almost 9 yards a reception, which was the second most in his career, as I've been saying. But, it's just, he wasn't used a whole lot. He only got 16 receptions, and he only got a couple more targets than that. But, he wasn't being used a whole lot. And I think Darrell Bevell, in his second year, being more familiar with his players, getting to know these players and what they do best, he's going to get Jesse James a little bit more involved this year. Don't be surprised if we run a lot of 2 tight end sets and we have 2 tight ends running routes and Jesse James gets more targets this year. Don't be surprised if Jesse James is more of a focal point in this offense next year. And, we've seen throughout his career, he is a very solid veteran tight end. We brought him in to be that good tight end. We brought him in to be a good blocker, but also be a factor in the receiving game. He was a factor in the receiving game when we got him the ball, but we just need to get him the ball more. And I think that Darrell Bevell will get him the ball more in 2020, and his stats stats will look much, much better, and he will, in Detroit Lions fans' eyes, at least start to live up to that contract that we gave him. And then we move on to the third tight end, who, has a ton of upside, is a guy that, was an undrafted free agent in Hunter Bryant, but a lot of people had him going in the 4th round. A lot of people had him going, early 4th to, throughout the 4th round, and he for one reason or another dropped all the way out of the draft, and we picked him up in undrafted free agency. Now, Hunter Bryant is a super athletic tight end, and with the Washington Huskies last year, he had 52 receptions for 825 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, he's a very good athletic receiving tight end. Not super good at blocking, but again, we have those blocking tight ends in TJ Hockenson and Jesse James already. And the Detroit Lions, I believe, found a gem in undrafted free agency, as they got a guy with really good athleticism, really good size, and good speed, who is a pure receiving tight end, and just like, he is going to stretch the field. I'm not going to say that he's the best receiving tight end on the roster, because I still think TJ Hockenson is that, but he is better than Jesse James. He's a better receiving tight end than Jesse James. So I would not be surprised if he maybe gets some snaps over Jesse James too at some points in the season, because, in those 3rd and long situations, if we get backed up and it's 3rd and 15, you're going to want to put a big athletic tight end in Hunter Bryant out there more so than a primarily blocking tight end in Jesse James. And, I really think Jesse James is a really good talent, or I really think Hunter Bryant is a phenomenal talent and should have been drafted earlier in the NFL draft. He wasn't drafted at all, and the Detroit Lions, saw that immediately, and they picked him up minutes after the draft ended. They might have been on the phone with him after their 7th round pick. As soon as they picked, Jayshon Cornell in the 7th round, they were calling up Hunter Bryant. They're like, hey, man, we love your talent. We think you're fantastic. If you don't end up getting drafted, we want to bring you in to be a Detroit Lion. They were calling him before the draft was even over, and they were trying to recruit him to bring him in and be a Detroit Lion, because they have that much faith in him. They have that much respect for his talent level. So that's the receiving core, really. Obviously, we have Isaac Nauta too, but he hasn't really shown a lot in the NFL, and there are speculations that we're going to move him to fullback. So he could contribute in this receiving core, but just looking at the guys I listed, like, this receiving core is, in my opinion, the best in the NFL. We have so much talent at the top end in Marvin Jones and Kenny Galladay being 2 top 20 wide receivers. Kenny Galladay, in my opinion, is a top 5. Marvin Jones is a top 20. Amendola, I believe, is a top 50, which is still wide receiver 2 category. Marvin Hall, I wouldn't say is a top 50 wide receiver, but he is our big play threat. He can take the top off of defense, and just every time we target him, he gets big plays. Quintez Cephus is a very high upside rookie who I am very, very high on, and I think he will have an impact on this roster this year. TJ Hockenson, a lot of people think are going to break out. Jesse James is a reliable tight end who, actually when he got the ball last season was pretty effective. And then Hunter Bryant, again, a very high upside tight end prospect out of the University of Washington. So this receiving core has so much talent. It has so much depth in it right now, but it also has so much potential for the future. Kenny Galladay is still on his rookie contract. TJ Hockenson is going into his 2nd year. Hunter Bryant and Quintez Cephus are rookies. Like, Marvin Hall's only 27. This receiving core outside Marvin Jones and Danny Amendola is really, really young, and they still have room to grow. They still have room to develop, and they have all this talent now. But in a couple of years, when Galladay is going, when Galladay is on his 2nd contract and making money, when TJ Hockenson's rookie contract is up, when Quintez Cephus and Hunter Bryant, their rookie contracts are up and they're getting paid again, they're going to have time to develop, and they're going to be even scarier in the future. So I think the Detroit Lions, even if they don't have one now, which I think they do, I think the argument can definitely be made that they have the best wide receiving core in the NFL. In a couple of years, when all these guys develop a little bit more, they're definitely going to have the best, and it won't even be a question. With that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comments below. What do you guys think? Do you think that the Detroit Lions have the best receiving core in the NFL? Do you think it's top 5? Do you think it's number 1? Or do you think it's kind of outside that top 5 and that I'm just overhyping some of these players? Let me know that down in the comments below. But with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. But if there is more Lions before tomorrow, I will obviously make a video letting every single person know. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. I will see all of you tomorrow with more Detroit Lions content. But until then, bye guys.